Most people enter monogamy when they're teenagers and they never ask the question, why am I doing this? But when someone chooses polyamory, everybody's going to ask them why.
How to discern between a true desire for polyamory versus a fear of intimacy or a fear of commitment that can often come with monogamy.
The question that I always ask myself when I'm with a partner I love is,
as a society, we really feel quite uncomfortable with the idea of polyamorous relationships, and we kind of search for a way to prove that they are less successful.
People have these maybe understandable fears of the unknown, but the answer is not to demonize it, it's to go and learn. I consider a failure to be in a relationship that isn't serving you, that isn't healthy, but staying in it for other reasons. I think that's failing yourself.
Welcome back, listeners. Good to see you all again. Today we have a guest who, for the second time's in back, someone who I reached out to a little while ago because I was just feeling that there's this more and more call that I speak to, whether that's men I'm coaching, whether it's people I'm speaking to and friends and so forth, there's this understanding of polyamory and open relating. I feel there's a lot of misconceptions about what it is. We do a lot of projection onto what it is. And I think that a lot of people have this very misguided idea of what it is and how it works, and comparing it to monogamy in ways that maybe are not always fair. So I've got a guest that, like I said, I've been back for the second time, back again. Roy, how are you doing today?
Hey, David, I am really good. Good to be here.
Great. And Roy is someone who, I've been following Roy from before when we were last on the podcast. And I know that from your work, you specialize in working with people in open relating and polyamory and so forth, and that comes into just not just your coaching work, but also your therapy work you've now entered into.
Yeah, so since we last spoke, I've completed my psychotherapy course, and I'm accredited therapist now. I also did my master's, and I wrote my thesis on psychotherapy for polyamorous clients. So as part of that, I did a lot of research and interviews with people who have had therapists of different kinds and their experience bringing polyamory into the therapy room. And oftentimes what they've experienced is being shut down, being kind of pathologized for having kind of non-monogamous, polyamorous desires, and often blaming everything on that rather than looking at the core issues that they want to go to therapy for. So I focused on that in my thesis. And as part of my work, I see clients of all sorts, including monogamous clients, not just polyamorous clients, but I do have this specialty and I guess a niche, both in my coaching work and my therapy work. And I also practice what I preach, and I am basically identified as polyamorous for over a decade. I also run some sharing circles and a polyamory social in London once a month, and to support the building of community, which I think is a big part of exploring alternatives to the traditional monogamous relationship, is really about creating community. And we can talk more about that later on.
I'm actually really fascinated about your thesis, because this is something that's actually come up with some of my past clients, where they had therapy or they had couple therapy, and they were talking about polyamory, and the therapist, they felt that the therapist wasn't, we say, welcoming to the idea or open to the idea. So I'm interested in what were some of your kind of key findings inside in your thesis?
Well, the thesis was focused on my modality, which is called Psychosynthesis. And it was basically about how to create a welcoming and supportive and nurturing environment in the therapy room to work with polyamorous clients, to basically get to the core of who they authentically are and help them discover that. It's important to also know that it is true that sometimes people do choose to practice non-monogamy, maybe for unhealthy reasons. Like it can be that it's for avoiding intimacy or not wanting to settle down and like tie themselves down, for being afraid of being vulnerable, etc., and like wanting to basically have lots of options open. So that can be a reason. I don't think it's the majority of the cases, but I think that if people haven't examined their life and examined who they are and their traumas and their wounding, then that could happen. So even though I'm fully accepting, it's still healthy to ask the questions of like, why do you want this? The issue I found when I was writing my thesis, and that came up even before that from clients and friends who have been to therapists, is that at best, therapists are uninformed. They don't understand it. They're ignorant of what polyamory really involves. The language, the vocabulary of it is just kind of alien to them. So if they are a good ethical therapist, they might say, hold their hands up, say, I don't know about this. I can work with you on these issues, but for this, while I accept it and I welcome you, I don't know enough, so you should find somebody else, right? And those that maybe aren't as conscientious will maybe make things up or go and read a book and try to make up for it, but it's not enough. And at worst, there are therapists who bring their own biases, their own personal beliefs into the therapy experience. And if they believe that monogamy is like the only way to be happy and healthy in a relationship, which is the predominant conventional wisdom in most relationship books and texts, and kind of manuals around therapy and psychology. So it's understandable that their training, for the majority, it's only very recently that training in relationship therapy started introducing alternatives to monogamy. So in a similar way that only very recently, kink and BDSM has been removed as a pathology, as a mental illness from the medical textbooks and the kind of mental health manuals. And so people who have been trained in the last 20, 30 years, they would have these biases. And that can often lead to people feeling like they're not really validated in their feelings. And they trust the therapist. They hold them to a higher standard probably. They see them as somebody who is there to help them and to kind of give them wisdom, etc. So they may start questioning themselves and what they're feeling. And that can be unhealthy. And also, as I mentioned earlier, it means that they're not looking at the real issue. For example, if a couple have opened up and there is some suspicion or jealousy arising because one of them or both are seeing other people, it's very easy to basically say, well, the problem is that you opened up. If you stay monogamous, you won't have jealousy. Whereas really what we want to understand is, where does this jealousy comes from? There's an insecurity that kind of underline that, right? So if you are jealous because your partner is going out with somebody that you maybe don't know and don't know what their intention, the other person is, what their intention is, whether they try to steal your partner, etc., then that comes from somewhere, right? Where you don't have enough trust in your partner to make the right decisions that will protect you. It's not really about the other person. And in some cases, again, it varies from person to person, but there are people who, when they meet this other person, and they're no longer this amorphous being, but they're a real life flesh and blood person, they relax because, okay, they're just a nice person and they're not threatening to my relationship, so it's fine. And then some people will choose to not meet their metamors, the partner of the partner. But again, what I think polyamory can really do is encourage you and rattle you to look deep into your insecurities, into your wounding, and find healing there. And that's the point where people often come to see me or come to see a therapist, right? Because they opened up, they thought it'll be easy because they had such a great relationship and everything is great. And all of a sudden, they're facing problems, challenges that they didn't even know they had, because things that maybe could have been papered over in the past, all of a sudden become these big cracks in the relationship. And you can no longer ignore it. So one thing that I find very positive is that a lot more couples who open up the relationship go to therapy or coaching. And that helps them generally in how to communicate in their relationship. So whether they stay together or not, the fact that they can go through therapy and work on these issues is a positive thing.
Interesting. Yeah. And it echoes, like I said, it echoes so many of the experiences that other people that I've met have found. And I guess it also echoes the therapist's experiences, also echoing us kind of societal way in which we kind of view polyamory. It's almost like there's a little bit of suspicion towards anyone who may decide to take this slightly different relational path. You know, there's a lot of, I think I mentioned it before, there's a lot of like projection that we do onto people who choose to be polyamorous. And I guess what are your thoughts on that projection that you probably observe in the clients you work with, and even society more widely?
Well, I suppose I can start with observing it on myself, in my own journey, whether it's with friends or family members or just people I encounter that find out that I'm polyamorous. It's getting easier, especially in a place like London, where there's a lot more acceptance and it's a lot more liberal. And, people will discover that it's harder to feel accepted in smaller communities where there is a lot, I guess, more conservative culture, right, and views. Ultimately, like with people coming out as gay or bi or queer, most of the reaction, when it's a negative reaction, is indicative of a projection of their own insecurities, right? If monogamy was so natural and easy, then there'll be zero fear or anxiety around people choosing not to do that. Okay, they're choosing the hard path, let's say. But monogamy is a natural way, therefore they can choose it. Eventually, like, I can just believe they'll find out that it's too hard and they'll come back to the fold. And I'm not feeling threatened by that if I believe monogamy is for me. The fact that people are so often like so vocal and angry about people coming out as polyamorous or non-monogamous, I think it's in a way indicates that they're not actually that secure in their own relationship. And that makes sense. And again, I would as an analogy give religion, organized religion. The people who adhere to a particular religious doctrine often are very vocal in their stand against other religions or against atheism, because they see that as a threat. And I think that they see it as a threat because they need to constantly justify why they're walking this pretty difficult path, of organized religion, of whatever it is. So with monogamy, it isn't that easy. Like, it is, you have to make compromises and sacrifices to maintain total sexual romantic exclusivity to one person for your entire life. And monogamy, by definition, if we are very strict about it, is one partner, one spouse for your entire life. Right? What most people do is serial monogamy or consecutive polyamory, whatever you want to call it. I mean, ultimately, if you had a relationship with somebody for 5 years and you broke up and you start dating somebody else, in many cases, you still love your ex. Maybe the breakup was around them moving countries or they left you, but you still love them. But you can still fall in love with another partner. And that doesn't mean you would no longer think at all about your ex, right? They're still there in the background, and sometimes you think about them and you have a feeling. So in that sense, if you can do that, you can probably also be polyamorous under the right circumstances. So monogamy is hard. It's why the state and the church created so many boosters, so many props to kind of keep it going, right? Whether it's legal contracts, property rights, inheritance, all those things are so much easier when you're monogamous and you're married and you kind of are legal. And okay, let's say even that most people will come to monogamy if they had the choice. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but if people grew up from a very young age knowing that there are multiple ways to be in a relationship. And I did an exercise, like an article where I kind of, it's like a thought exercise on what will happen in a world where monogamy isn't the default, right? So all these options, just like that cars can come in lots of colors. Just know that and not one dynamic is better or worse than the other. How many people will knowingly choose to commit to one person for life? I don't know. But even if it is still the majority, that doesn't make any other option less valid or rewarding for those that end up choosing it and feel themselves in that. For myself, I didn't know about polyamory for the majority of my life. I, just like most people, grew up believing that I need to find somebody who will complement me in all ways, like, be really suitable and match me in lots of different ways. So I wouldn't need anybody else. And it was only after having a series of long-term but relationship that ultimately ended that I started thinking that maybe that's not the only way, that something here doesn't work, because I am trying and it always ends after a long time. So I had a continuous 5 years, 6 years, whatever of relationship that went well until it didn't. And I was in this kind of questioning phase and just being single and dating when I met somebody who introduced polyamory to me. And as soon as I understood, oh, this is actually a concept, there's a word to it, people are doing it, there are books about it, it is an alternative. And even though it's not popular and isn't in the mainstream, it can still be valid. So I started trying it because the person I wanted to date was polyamorous. And I immediately, I think, realized that this is what was missing in my life. That I don't know if that's the reason why my monogamous relationships didn't work out long term, but I think it has a lot to do with me feeling often kind of restricted and closed up in these monogamous relationships. And it wasn't because my partners were especially jealous or controlling, but I still felt that there was a restriction, that I wasn't totally free. And interestingly, my first kind of live-in polyamorous relationship, which lasted about 3 years, even though it was polyamorous, it was quite controlling, and my ex-partner was controlling in lots of other ways, and often experiencing kind of jealousy and needing to know all the information and have control over who I was seeing, etc. So while it was polyamorous, I still felt that I wasn't free, right? And in the last 7 years or so, when I think about relationships, the main thing is that my partners want me to be free. They accept me that I am a free person. They love that about me. And as a result, I'm a lot more relaxed. And it doesn't mean I have to exercise that freedom all the time. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But it's just knowing that I can, that nobody else tells me how to live my life other than myself.
Yeah. It's a really powerful story there you added on to the end. And as you were thinking about this idea of the thought experiment of, if we grew up with polyamory as something that was just another option, it kind of made me think around, I guess it's something that comes to me as being a black man, as like, 40, 50, 60 years ago, relationships from people of different heritages, particularly people who are black and with people who are, say, British, white, or Indian, Asian, and people who are British, white, were frowned upon. It's frowned upon to a very strong degree. So much so, I remember an ex-girlfriend of mine who was mixed race. She remembers hearing her granddad tell her mother, I think it was, that by being with her, having a child with a black man, she had polluted their bloodline. This was the very strong rhetoric we had. And what we've seen is this softening of this rhetoric, through the kind of, it's happened through the 70s, the 80s and 90s, and now to the point where, there's barely any sort of thought or any sort of judgment of if you see people like a mixed heritage relationship at all. So, and I kind of compare that to, as you said, the thought experiment around polyamory. If people just saw it as something that is an option and it's not frowned upon and they're not going to be judged and they're not going to have their parents try and disown them and things like that, what do people lean towards doing? They kind of lean towards, opening and looking at the different options and assessing them and seeing if things are really true and right for them. And my personal kind of feeling is that we're going to see more and more people move to more open styles of relating and relationships as time goes on, just simply because there will be less and less judgment around them quite naturally unless something shifts. But as it becomes more awareness and information and more communities and tools and learning how that can work, because you'll see children that be born into polyamorous relationships, it feeling really good and happy for them, and it'll be an option for them to do themselves, or we'll just see a kind of an expanding of this idea of what relationship means. That's kind of my personal take.
Yeah, I think these are all good analogies, and I think one more that maybe makes this point even clearer is that even, if you think about women coming into the workforce, and women, used to be basically property and couldn't do anything without a man. So that seemed natural at the time, and now we see it and think, what the hell? People used to be born into a job for life because their father used to do that job, and then they have to do the same thing. Now people are growing up saying, okay, I can do whatever I want. I'm open, as long as I can go study, I can go apprenticeship, whatever. There is that freedom of choice. And there's no reason why we can't have the same thing in a relationship. And that also means that some people might start out dating openly and transparently multiple people, and then decide that for them monogamy fits better. But at least they will know. They're not just doing it by default. They're not just going into something blind because society told them this is how they should do it. They're basically saying, I know all these options. I can try. I can go through a phase where I'm exploring, and then I can choose the right path for me. And that might be monogamy now. It might be monogamy forever. It might be polyamory for a while. It can keep changing. And by the way, a lot of polyamorous people are still living what looks like monogamous life because they have either one partner and they just don't at the moment have time, capacity for more, or they have a long distance partner that they only see on holidays and once in a few months. So to society at large, they seem like they are monogamous, couple. And I guess the next step for me, I want to see as evolution, is moving away from everything being couple-centric, everything focusing on the dyad. What I see because I coach and offer therapy to individuals, couples, sometimes triads, 3 people or 4 people in a relationship together. And a lot of the challenges that come up is because of this enmeshment that happens for people when they live together and there's only 2 of them, and they start becoming codependent in their emotional kind of world, in what they do for each other, in the expectation that their partner is there for them, that it's their responsibility to make them happy, to take care of their emotional needs. And many people who are very self-efficient emotionally, materially, as single people, give away that power to be self-sufficient when they enter a relationship because of, well, I can go into the reasons, but generally it comes from a place of reverting back to childhood and to how you were with your parents. And also sometimes, and I know it from my own personal experience because I did that also when I was monogamous in the past, of needing or feeling like I need my partners to need me, that I need to be of utility, of value to them. If I'm not, they will leave me, right? So basically that belief there is that they're only with me because I give them value, because I provide something, or I cook, or I give them good orgasms, whatever it is. This is the reason why they're with me, not just because they love me for who I am. And I think that came from, in the past, of just me not believing that I'm worthy of love, right? So polyamory allows me to examine that in so many different ways and come to this self-sufficiency and emotional regulation, and just knowing that I am enough. And whoever is with me, because I know they have a choice and they can be with anybody, and actually there's nothing coercing them, manipulating them to be with me. It's totally 100% free choice. It also helps with that affirmation that, yeah, I am loved for who I am, and I no longer have those insecurities that I used to. So I think, well, maybe it's controversial, I don't know, but I would say that it can be helpful for people to try openly relate at some point in their life, and just to kind of learn more about themselves and about how they relate with different people, how they manage, because they need to have such good communication, and that's a great practice. Let's say even if you don't are interested in polyamory, if you take the way that most polyamorous people communicate, with transparency, with radical honesty, with compassion, they're not just naturally that way. They go and they learn. They read books, they go to courses, they go to therapy, to coaching. They up their game when it comes to the skill of communication, because they know that they cannot really manage multiple relationships without it. But that's such an important thing to have, even in monogamy.
Yeah, and I can echo that from my own experience of kind of open relating, that it actually really taught me to move through some of the blocks I had around hard and difficult conversations, around conflict, around being with my partner's emotions. That in monogamous relationships, it was easy for me to, well, not easy, but there was less demand on me to have difficult conversations about their partners and who they'd been with and so forth. And also around creating actual agreements. because in monogamy, there's this kind of often this template monogamy that people just fall into, and it's to make the assumption that, oh, well, my partner isn't going to flirt with anybody else because that's just how monogamy is. And we have these different templates in our mind, and it caused us in my relationship with my partner, when we were open at the beginning, we like really sat down and was like, okay, what's the boundaries of our relationship? What are the things that we need to talk about first or discuss? And this is something that monogamous people really, I coach a lot of monogamous people, and it's like kind of foreign idea to them to have these conversations and have these difficult conversations. So I can say for myself that the communication that I built in open relating has really steered me really beautifully through my monogamous relationship and even into fatherhood with my partner that I'm into now. And I was really interested in a couple of things you said there actually around, the belief around utility of like feeling like you're enough and then also the kind of codependency and controlling behavior, because these are exactly things that occur in monogamous relationships, very standardly. Like there's even some books, I think it's the book Attached, that quote, if I can't quote directly, but I'm pretty sure it says in it's like a relationship, a monogamous relationship is a codependent entity, and it should be codependent. I think they're talking about the avoidant people at that point, and their dislike for too much closeness or dependency. But all these pieces that you're describing that kind of have cropped up inside relationships you've had are the same things that occur in monogamous relationships.
They happen in many monogamous relationships. And again, I want to differentiate between unconscious kind of default monogamy and a conscious choice to be monogamous when you know there are other options. I think that's a very different thing. So
yes,
I guess maybe we can talk about conscious versus unconscious relating. If you're conscious and you basically say, the way I work, when I focus on one person, I'm not interested to date anybody else, and I prefer also that my partner focuses all their energy and time because I want to build something that requires a lot of time together, and there isn't just the energy and time for other people. Okay. Again, can you be secure enough to be okay if your partner goes on a business trips and hooks up with somebody? Right? That doesn't actually change anything in your life. It doesn't take away because they're away anyway. They're not going to be with you. Can you be secure in your own connection to be okay with that? I think that's what differentiates somebody who from the unconscious monogamy of saying, well, it's just meant to be this way. It's like there is an institution called monogamy, and the reason I feel secure is because I subscribe to that model. And that is basically saying I paid monogamy to give me security and it has to deliver. And that actually often means that we don't take the time and the intention to really build deep trust and intimacy with our partner, because it's just easy to be like, yeah, they're there, they're just going to be there because we're married, because they live together, because we bought a house, so they have nowhere else to go. I think that's ends up in taking a partner for granted, and eventually, and as we know, I think that I haven't read recent statistics, but from what I've read, majority of relationships, monogamous, do break up. Divorce rates are around 50%, and most people break up before they even get married. So they're not in the divorce statistics. So yeah, again, if monogamy was so natural, why does it end so frequently? I think that we can expand our vision of relationship to a degree where we actually can say we don't even need for a relationship to be successful, to register successful, doesn't mean it has to last forever. Doesn't mean that it has to be monogamous. It doesn't actually have to mean anything other than you and the other person that you were relating with both agree they were successful.
yes.
I've had relationships that lasted a year or 2 years, and for that duration it was really good, and then at some point it ended because of a variety of reasons that weren't about us not caring about each other, but it could be logistical, it could be our values diverge, we want different things in life, we're in different places in our life, and the focus has to be different. Maybe sexual attraction went down, but we still can retain the friendship. So a relationship can transform and evolve. It doesn't have to be the same, to stay the same, but even if it ends, it doesn't mean it failed. I consider a failure to be recognizing you're in a relationship that isn't serving you, that isn't healthy, but staying in it for other reasons. I think that's failing yourself. And I want to recognize that some people can't live because it's an abusive relationship, or because they're dependent, or because of legal reasons, right? So there are other reasons why somebody will stay even when don't want to. But if you have the means and the ability, and you're staying in something just because you're telling yourself, I'm meant to stay, but you're unhappy, or even, you're suffering, then you're failing yourself. And I wish people could talk about those difficult things, like have these difficult conversations with each other, because they might find that a different version of a relationship might work better for them.
Mm-hmm. It's a really beautiful distinction there, because I think there's a common, and I think you alluded to this common idea that a successful monogamous relation is one that lasts forever, which, as you pointed out, that means that, I couldn't know the statistics, but even you're probably looking at most people have a successful monogamous relationship, maybe 5% of the relation, less than 5%, probably like 1%, even less, because it's just so, I don't know how many monogamous relationships most people have in a lifetime. That would be an interesting statistic to find out. But, I'm just looking at myself and thinking, I've had at least 4 long-term relationships that lasted 9 months plus. I can currently say the one I'm in is successful, but I would, if by the metric you use, and also by the metric I've kind of used, I personally have always looked at the metric of, did the relationship teach me something about myself? Did I learn something about myself, life, and relationships? Did it serve us both at that time? And really looking at it from that point of view. And I can look back and go, well, every single relationship I've in has been successful, bar 1 or 2 that were probably really misguided, but they taught me something about myself, my life, how to be in relationship. And I found that it allows us to kind of look back at our relationships a little better, because I think sometimes we have this habit as human beings to look back on relationships and see all the bad, to maybe stop us from wanting to go back, especially with recent ones. But it's allowed me to look back and go, actually, I learned a hell of a lot in that relationship. And I'm really grateful for that person. They weren't the partner for me, or at times they weren't great, but they taught me how to communicate more. They taught me to love more deeply. They showed me the things I really desired and wanted in a relationship. I look back at one of my relationships, and this I've said this before on the podcast, and it was never a kind of a committed relationship. And she, broke my heart. I told her I loved her and she wanted to break up. But that relationship is probably the one that done me the most good, because it allowed me to face a fear of loving someone more than they love me, and coming to face with it and moving through it and seeing that I would be okay. I wouldn't be hurt, and I wouldn't be, not hurt, I was hurt, but I would survive it, and I always look back on that relationship and, with like incredible gratitude for what it taught me about myself and love.
Yeah. Do you know Dan Savage?
Yes, I've listened to him bits and pieces here and there.
So he's got a good relationship advice podcast, but he coined the term the campfire or the campsite rule, which is always leave the relationship better than you found it. So like if you can if you left each other with a better sense of yourself, like with feeling in a better place than you started, then that's a good relationship. In Burning Man culture, we call it leave a better trace, LBT. And the idea is that you, in some way, I feel that I've improved. Some way I feel like my partner also, or my ex-partner, is a better version of themselves, and then therefore it was a success.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a question around a phenomenon that comes into my coaching quite reasonably frequently, which is a couple being in a kind of monogamous relationship, and then there's a desire to move into a polyamorous relationship. And I guess a question I have to start with is like, what does that couple need to not just do, but kind of embody to make that transition a successful one?
It's a good question. It comes up a lot because, again, I don't know if most people come into non-monogamy, or what I like to call multigamy instead of non-monogamy. It's something I use often, but because multigamy can include open relationships, swinging, a monogamish kind of relationships, as well as polyamory. So first off, I think, is examining your relationship. So doing a full relationship audit to see where are the struggle points, what's still a challenge, how are you communicating, can you bring difficult topics with each other? Can you come and talk about the difficult things? Can you talk to your partner about something that's true for you that they may find difficult to sit with, and can they hear you out without immediately personalizing it, getting defensive? It's like checking the dynamic that when you come out with something, is your partner immediately defensive, or are you getting defensive? Or can you just sit and give them space to speak and recognize that that's their truth? It doesn't mean they're criticizing you. Even if it's something that they don't like about you, it's their truth, right? So like, can we have this honest and compassionate conversations? And if we can't, do we need to learn some tools like honesty, nonviolent communication? So skill up your kind of communication game as a starting point. And think about what you personally stand to gain or explore in this dynamic that you want to explore. What is it for you? It's not a good answer is not, I'm doing this because my wife wants to, so I'm just to keep her so she won't leave me, I'm agreeing to it. That's not a good reason. But often that's what happens. One side wants to open and the other side is like, I don't want to leave my partner, so I'll just go along with it. And often that's when they come to see me, right? So now, if you can wait until you figure this out, great. Sometimes people can't wait. If somebody felt all their life that they're missing something and all of a sudden they have a chance to explore it, I can see why they may not want to wait until their partner catches up emotionally with it, right? And is fully in acceptance. But there's going to be pain if it's done really quickly and without waiting for that. Now, there are relationships where it's one-sided. One side sees other people, the other does not. It's called monopoly relationships. And that can work because the monogamous partner in there can still see benefits to the dynamic. And that might be just that their partner is a lot happier, a lot more fulfilled, and that energy and the positive energy is coming back to also benefit the relationship. It can be that they get extra days a week where they're free and they can do their hobbies that their partner really doesn't like, right? Or they can see their friends, or just spend time alone and read books, whatever that they like, that they basically before didn't have time for. So finding what it means for them and how they can benefit from it is an important part of it. One more thing, let's see, for people opening up is to also look at the codependency issues. So really examine where codependency comes up. What are they really relying on that only the partner has provided them? And can they either make sure that they can provide it for themselves, or that they have a network, an emotional support network, a friendship network that they can go to if their partner is unavailable? So stop relying on your partner for everything and recognize where that's happening, that you can do something about it. Right? That's really important to avoid the feeling of kind of loss of control, or kind of feeling like the ground has kind of dropped beneath your feet when your partner is out on a date. So you need to kind of go and find more security elsewhere as well. And when you decide on how to do it, you mentioned earlier, like agreements, right? Making agreements is a place where a lot of couples do stumble, because they want to put some rigid rules in place to protect what they had. So let's say they started monogamy, they're opening up, but they still want to protect elements of the monogamy that gives them security, right? So for example, yes, we can go and have sex with other people, but we're not allowed to fall in love with anybody else. That's a rule, but it's also an unrealistic rule, because you have no control of it unless you are denying yourself. So people can fall in love after meeting somebody for 3 times and having sex with them. It happened, right? So you can't control feelings. Some people try to put on additional rules, like you can only see a person for maximum 3 times, or only 1 time, or you can't have any overnight, you can't sleep over, so you don't build any intimacy. Okay, at some point that's not going to work for one of you or both of you, and it's good to be realistic about it from the beginning. So rather than making these rigid rules that usually are only there to protect the sense of security of one partner over the other, we want to consider making agreements that can be changeable, and that we keep checking in with each other if they're still fit for purpose. So the agreement may be, okay, initially we won't have overnights, and that's in both directions. And then if one of us wants to, we talk about it and see, okay, well, let's introduce it, let's see what happens, right? And maybe at some point I'm seeing somebody enough and they want to go on holiday with me, and it's like something we've never discussed before, and we had an agreement about it, but you know what? Can we talk about it? Can we have a conversation about changing and adapting the agreement so we both feel that our needs are met and that also our wants and our desires are seen, you know? So I would say, yeah, don't use the language of rules. Consider agreements are only valid as long as both people really want that. And if that doesn't, it's not the case anymore, be willing to check in with each other and discuss changing it.
Powerful. Yeah. It's like, as you describe it, and maybe it's just the way you've described it, it's not how you kind of frame it, is the kind of like slow opening almost is how I heard it sound. I'm not sure if that's just the as you just where you were describing the agreements and those shifting and changes, that's what that was. But is that something that, because what I often come across is, you know, I work with men and there's a man and he wants the relationship to open and his partner is like, they don't really want it. But he's like, well, if you don't want it, then I'm actually going to go and find a new relationship. She's like, okay, then we can do this. And then enforces a load of rules, right? It could be anything from like you said, I don't want any overnights. I don't want you to sleep with any sex workers, you know, things like this. And then it creates a dynamic that I've seen a few times where the man kind of makes an agreement, but is actually then starts to be not truthful to avoid hurting and upsetting the other person.
Yeah, that's common. And people often would rationalize things for themselves. You know, it's very like, well, I made this agreement, but I don't really, my heart isn't really in it. So I will basically try to skirt the line, go in the blurred edges, you know, and I can always have some plausible deniability or whatever. Or if she doesn't know, then I can get away with it, etc. Ultimately, yeah, long term, it's not a strategy. By the way, it's probably safer to say go only with sex workers because they're not going to get attached. But just, but I think in all of these cases, what happens is, yeah, the man maybe is pushing for something, but they're not going to get what they really want because there's going to be all these conditions attached. And what in this particular example is probably better is that you find a way to help your partner feel more secure, more relaxed, by going at their pace, right? By the way, it's statistically true that most of the time it is the man that wants to open a relationship, and also most of the time it is ultimately the woman who is a lot more happy in being open. And usually it's like, it starts like that. The woman then reluctantly goes, she starts doing it herself. She's a lot more successful in that and ultimately gets a lot more dates, and the man gets upset and wants to close it back down. I see that often happening. So it's okay if you're not at the same pace. Exactly. It's okay if you want different things. Sometimes one person is going to want to just have hookups or sex parties or go to kind of dungeon parties and BDSM clubs or orgies or whatever. And then the other person might just want slow burn dates where little happen, or either demisexual and they just want to slowly build up a connection, intimate connection with somebody. And that's fine. You don't want to look for total equality. It's not a reciprocal thing where you have to do the same thing. Oftentimes people think that that's what's going to keep them safe. It's not, because both of them are going to be unhappy. So it's more about kind of finding equity, and means that for each person, it's what's right for them. And I think the question that I always ask myself when I'm with a partner I love is, okay, what do I love about them? If it's how they make me feel, then that's not love. That's narcissism. That's self-validation, kind of validation. That's needing the validation of others for me to feel good. That's not about love. It can be attachment, but it's not love. Love is, I love them for who they are. I see them as a person. I'm like, wow, this is an amazing person. And I want them to be more of who they are. I want them to find their authentic voice. I want them to grow spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and always feel like they are their true selves, right? I don't have control over it. It's their journey. I'm there for the journey. I'm happy to be part of it. And if they want to share that with me, if they want to ask me something about it, that's great, but it's their journey. So if their journey leads them to meet somebody else and leave me, for example, maybe in monogamy or also polyamory sometimes, okay, it's hard, it pains me, it hurts, but it's still their journey and it's their choice. It's their, I don't get to say what they do with their body, with their soul, with their heart. I'm just like happy that they choose to share that with me sometimes. And And if they meet somebody else and still want to be with me, great. So I know that even though they are caring and developing feelings for someone else, that hasn't diminished how they feel about me. And that's actually, I feel, a really good place to be. So I need to, as much as freedom as I want for myself, I want that for my partners, right? It's the same. But that means that it's freedom for them to be who they are. And if they don't want to see anybody except for me, that's their choice, right? I can't force them to go see people just because I'm seeing people, even though it might make my life easier to know that they're also having other partners. But again, anything more than that is coercion and manipulation if I try to like dictate that for them. So I think I answered your question, but I'm not sure. But
No, you definitely did. And I guess I'm kind of like thinking of these pieces is where we want our partner, that we love our partner, we want them to be the authentic self. We want them to go and be like, grow into the person that we see them, their potential and all these things. But then we also have our fears and our worries and our insecurities about losing them, our relationship being damaged and so forth. And, our fear is a very powerful force and sometimes trumps our desire for our partner to really grow into the authentic self, which kind of creates this kind of hooking into and almost wanting to hold them as they are.
Yeah. I mean, that is an impulse for sure, but it is counterintuitive in many ways, as I'm sure you probably know. But essentially, if we're trying to hold on to someone by controlling or creating drama, or being a victim, whatever, ultimately, we're not being our authentic selves. We're not actually exploring our own growth. We're kind of holding on to something that's no longer there, really. And I think that in many cases, if you do that, the other person will just be pushed away, will move away, will leave you, or will shut down the part that really wants to connect with you because they're not feeling the support of who they really are. Now, that impulse comes from a place of fear, as you said. And what I want to see people doing in these situations is, first of all, daring to be vulnerable. Oftentimes, especially men, are not learning the language of vulnerability, right? So even though the inside they're feeling like the scared little child, they'll play a macho, controlling person. Like, no, you can't do this. I decided, I'm the man, whatever, like, you can't go out, or whatever it is. But that's not authentic, that's not true. And they're lying to themselves and to their partner. So what usually helps with the connection is to dare to be vulnerable. I find vulnerability to be the bravest and most masculine thing you can do. Like, yeah, I'm afraid. Yeah, I'm scared. Yeah, I'm afraid you'll leave me. Yeah, I'm afraid that this other guy has a bigger dick, whatever it is. I've been there. And, it's only by vocalizing it that I'm showing who I really am, and my partner can connect with me and maybe give me some reassurance that I need in that moment because I'm feeling weak. Okay. I'm feeling weak, but I'm expressing it with this strength of vulnerability. And they may point out all the ways and, all the reasons why they want to be with me. I'm like, yeah, actually, that's true. It doesn't really matter that this person has a hotter body or whatever. They're with me for all these other reasons that are still valid. I'm still that person. So I think that people can discover so much more in the connection and intimacy when they dare to be vulnerable. And I would love to see more men doing that.
Mm-hmm. And yes, amen to that. And it makes me think of that something you kind of mentioned earlier is that we're often with our partners and we have this unconscious belief that they're with us due to some utility or something we give them or something about what we do for them. And that the insecurity comes from if they're going to start seeing other people and being with other people, that utility can be found in someone else in a way that's better. And we don't realize that someone's with us because of who we are, our uniqueness, our essence, our beautiful soul. And it's until we can, through that vulnerability, you can reveal and connect over the real essence of why we're together instead of just the utility of like, better orgasms, bigger dicks, more money, and all the sorts of things that often come up for people when it comes to the insecurities around their relationships.
Yeah. And, I think it's a symptom of a society that's not very well, where we are as we grow up, we learn to only identify with this specific set of markers of what it means to be a man or a woman, right? So if I believe my partner is with me because I make a lot of money or because I have a muscular body, I'm going to invest all of my attention into that rather than like going and exploring who I really am and how do I connect deeper with my partner. And then when they leave me, I was like, oh, but I gave you money. It's like, well, yeah, that's not why they were with me. But that's the story I tell myself. So it gets in the way of really finding out who you are as a person. One really nifty and simple exercise to go deeper into this is to ask this question, who are you? Right? You can sit by yourself or with a friend or a partner and just ask each other, who are you? And write down something. And then again, ask, who are you? Write another thing. Who are you? Just keep doing it for a long time. And you might start with, I am a man, I am a father, I'm a provider. And then as you ask it again, you have to go really deeper inside to like question your psyche and your spirit, right? And then beautiful things come out. That's where I really encourage people to go. Go beyond that superficial. Everybody, lots of people can buy a big car or can get a great job. That's not what makes you unique, who you are. And if you compare yourself to others who have that, yes, it's going to be difficult to accept that your partner wants to be with somebody else. Often that happens in dynamics in heterosexual couples when they open up, where the man would say, yeah, we can open up, but we both get to go with other women, but you cannot see any other men. I'm going to put aside the queer phobia and the transphobia that this elicits. Well, we can go into it, but that's not really what I want to talk about now. It's more about, like, as you said, the fact that what I'm saying is if another man has a dick, right, and my partner is with them, then I am just another dick. That's all I am. And she can just replace me with another one. But, do I want to reduce myself to that? So I think that really says something about how a person sees themselves if they're putting that rule in place. And sometimes I hear this excuse or this reason people give, well, it's because I don't trust other men. Okay, but you trust your partner. Your partner chose you. If you don't trust other men, does that mean she cannot trust you either? Right? So again, go deeper and ask these questions, because you'll see that all of this is just like a house of cards that just falls down once you start asking hard questions.
Yeah, totally. That, he's just another dick. I love that saying. And it's like, I see it again. I've heard it before with men. It's like, oh, I don't want her to sleep with anyone else. I want to. And I've generally heard that from people who are cheating. Usually, is their way of doing that is being in monogamy, and they want to maybe sleep with somebody else. They want to sleep with another woman, but they don't want their partner to, because they don't want to confront the feelings and emotions that are there. And then they wrap that under the guise of like, oh, but it's different for women, men, this is the way it is, and blah, 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 all that kind of bullshit language, when really it's this desire to not go near their own insecurities about themselves and so forth. I've even heard it from some friends of mine who, the woman openly told me one day, we were in conversation, she was like, I'd be open to an open relationship. I'd be open to it. And the guy was like, no, I wouldn't be open to that. And in my head, I'm thinking, I was like, no, you would like this, but you just don't want her to sleep with anyone else because she would.
Yeah. And it's, again, society is really, society, so social norms are very much, based on the patriarchal society where there is this hierarchy and men's needs are prioritized over women's. And as a result of that, evolutionary biology, biology and psychology isn't a pure science, in the sense that it's influenced by social and moral kind of norms and religion over time, right? Darwin couldn't say everything he really observed about the evolution of species because he knew he had to adhere to religious doctrine. So he had to actually stay quiet about a lot of stuff that he would have said otherwise. And this idea that women are only interested to find one mate to have kids with, and the man's innate nature is to spread their sperm all over the place, isn't a fact. It is just a convention that we want to believe in because it suits our patriarchal structure. When you give women total safety and freedom to do what they really want to do knowing that they'll be safe, knowing that they won't be judged or slut shamed, they're just as capable of wanting casual sex, group sexes with different genders, to explore their sexuality as much of, probably even more than men. And they have capacity in terms of energy and vitality. They can have sex a lot longer and with more people than men can. It's a falsehood that, this belief that women are naturally not interested in that. And I think it's important for men to just recognize that. And I love my freedom, and I have it because all of my partners, who are by and large women, non-binary people, also are free to explore themselves. I couldn't just have that for myself and not want it for anybody else. That seems totally unfair.
Yeah, it does. Something we touched upon before we jumped on was this kind of idea around how polyamory and open relating are kind of coming into spiritual communities. It's something I've seen over the last kind of 4 or 5 years in myself. And a lot of like very spiritual language is being attached around polyamory, but even around monogamy, think like sacred union and so forth, and creating this, what feels like very religious connotations around monogamy, and like using that as to explain energy and why, people it's meant to be monogamous, and that's God, what meant for us, and all sorts of things. But also there's this other piece where non-monogamy is coming into spiritual communities, and it's been this kind of very spiritual language being attached to it. There's very spiritual ideas being attached to it as a way to, I don't know, not necessarily glorify it. I don't think that's the right term, but like to create acceptance around it. Even down to some of the things you mentioned before, and I've spoken on the podcast before around, we talked about improving communication, healing old wounds, and so forth as like polyamory being a route for it. Is this something you're seeing in, maybe personally or even in your clients, as this kind of spiritual element that's coming into conversation around polyamory?
Not so much with my clients. I guess it's part of a wider conversation that I see online on social media. I don't think it comes so much from my clients, and maybe it's because clients who come to psychotherapy aren't necessarily following a spiritual path specifically about that. They have their own spiritual practices, but they don't necessarily see that dealing with relationship issues or their wounds and traumas are part of that. I think that looking to find healing of trauma, let's say childhood trauma, through a spiritual path is precarious without support of like an actual kind of trained psychotherapist. And people do it, and people go and do ayahuasca and other psychedelics, or follow some spiritual teaching. And ultimately, if you're not doing a really deep process of healing with integration by a trained professional, you get a transference of the trauma into another layer, another sphere, which is the spiritual sphere. And I think we can spend a whole podcast just on that. But ultimately, you're a lot more susceptible if somebody comes with deep trauma, attachment trauma, into a spiritual space. They will transfer whatever is a trauma from childhood onto this new space, and that can mean much more susceptible to fall into a cult, to follow some kind of like cult leader or a very influential, powerful person, and just become attached to them instead. So I see that using spiritual language can sometimes indicate that something is going on, that where you just don't have all the agency you need to have to look after yourself, and to find your real kind of healing. So it's, whether it's monogamy or polyamory, whether it's other spiritual practices, ultimately we need to ask ourselves, what is the power structure? What is the power dynamic there, right? Who stands to benefit? And are you accepting somebody's way of, say, practicing polyamory because they're doing it and therefore you just see that as the right thing to do? Or do you really understand what it means to you, and it's a conscious choice to practice it? Have you examined it in as much objective way as you can, or you're just following it because it's the spiritual path. I think there's some danger in that. The spirituality that says everybody has to be polyamorous or everybody has to be monogamous is equally wrong and equally harmful.
It's taking away decisions and choice and agency from individual people and giving them a kind of dogma to follow.
Yeah, exactly.
And something else we touched on before we jumped on was this just a coincidence of that a man named Aubrey Marcus has announced his opening up his relationship. And I first of all say I don't know too much about this other than a few Instagram posts I came across over the last couple of days where people had there's a lot of comments, a lot of comments and a lot of people's opinion about, and a projection like we talked about earlier about, why, what it looks like, what little body language things mean and so forth. And I know you mentioned you had taken a kind of scratched the surface of this situation, and a few insights had kind of popped up for you. I don't know if you're open to sharing those.
So again, it was a very cursory glance because I only heard about it today, and I had a look at their at the video they put out. So one thing is, it's very much a cliche of seeing polyamory represented in 3 white people. 2 of them are women, 1 is a man, and both women are in a relationship with a man. That is such a cliche. And I think that it maybe it is a form that's acceptable because it shows up in some religions like Islam and Mormonism. So people have seen it before and maybe are more inclined to accept it. I don't know. But I think that the way that they represented the original marriage, which was of 2 people, and then this third person coming in. Are you familiar with the term unicorn and unicorn hunting? Have you heard of that? For those who haven't, there's a term called unicorn, which is when typically a woman who is bisexual joins a heterosexual couple, and is equally interested and wants to date both people. In polyamory, it's about seeking a long-term relationship with a couple. So the unicorn hunters are the couple who are seeking a third person, typically a woman. And it's generally frowned upon in the polyamorous community on ethical grounds, because the couple might still center their own relationship, and they see bringing somebody else into the relationship as the least riskiest way of opening up, right? This person needs to date them both. They're only spend time together, and ultimately it's either the couple on their own or the couple with a third person. But that third person is never with one of them alone, or they're not allowed to have sex with one of them alone. There's a lot of these rules in place. And if she doesn't want to date one of them, then they have to break up with everybody. Those things can apply. I'm not saying this is what happens in the case of Aubrey Marcus. I'm just, I guess, sharing what it brings up, what it elicits when you see that dynamic. And the challenge there is that often the original couple are set in their ways. They have their ways of doing the relationship, and they often expect the third person to just fit, like a little puzzle piece that finds a way to fit in both, right? And whatever rules and agreements they have, she just has to accept it. So again, whereas the agency for her is lacking, because she has to either accept it or leave. And people that do that and support that would say, well, it's ethical because we say that we're open about it in advance and she chooses to accept it. And some things are easier to go along with when you're initially new into a relationship and all excited and all the hormones are flying and there's a new relationship energy and it's just great fun. And then once things settle and feelings get deeper and there's attachment, it becomes harder to leave, right? So again, there's an unequal power dynamic with this couple and the third person. And then the other thing I saw there is just the way that they're referring to this other person who is like a spiritual teacher to define what this is. And I feel like ultimately every relationship is unique and different. And in polyamory, there are no like set ways of doing it. So it all can be very, very different. If it works for them, that's great. I wish them lots of luck. I don't know, if this one particular spiritual teacher can be the source of all truth in that regard, right? So it's just good to get lots of different opinions and advice from lots of people, and also check in with each other that everybody feels that they have agency and autonomy in that relationship. I guess that's what I can say about it from the little that I know.
Yeah. And I think you can layer on to the fact that, you talked about the couple having quite a lot of power consciously and unconsciously. And if that couple of people who are known in the wider world and they have celebrity status, that adds to the power imbalance with the person, because then you've entered into like, there's like a pedestaling unconsciously, whereas like this couple are these big people. We see the same thing in it's why we are disapproving now of relationships between people within the same company, where one person is like the CEO and the other person is a secretary to somebody, because there's a power imbalance which stops the person who is of less power having a true maybe view of that person and maybe viewing them, the attraction through the power dynamic.
Yeah, that is really, really true. Yeah. It's relevant here.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's kind of leapt out to me, again, I don't know as much details, I've seen the comments and stuff, is the projection that people, looking for these little evidence of like big problems in the relationship from how someone looked and and it's just this way, and as we touched upon before, just the way that as a society, we really feel quite uncomfortable with the idea of polyamorous relationships. And we kind of search for a way to prove that they are less successful or more damaging as well, I think is one of the narratives I've seen for people, that they create more hurt and harm.
Yeah, there is that belief. I mean, again, it's very much projection, and it's not necessarily based on any evidence. All research done on it, and we need more research because it's a relatively new phenomenon in the public eye, but all the research that does exist points that there is no significant difference. In fact, say children to polyamorous families are just as happy and adjusted, in some cases more, because they have more positive adult role models in their lives. And also people who are, grow up in polyamorous kind of parenting environments. When they grow up, some of them are monogamous, some of them polyamorous. There's no it's not like they're brainwashed into polyamory or anything like that. So there's also no evidence that that's happening. So I would say that people have this maybe understandable fears of the unknown, but the answer is not to demonize it. It's to go and learn and ask questions, and make it less unknown and more familiar. So every monogamous person should have a polyamorous friend that they can just check in with and ask and see, is what I'm thinking a projection, or is it like a genuine question, right? And if they're in London, they want to come to the polyamorous meetup and hear from actual polyamorous people, they're welcome. Yeah.
I think it's important too. I have one last question. The question was actually asked by someone on Instagram, and you kind of touched on it before, but I don't know if we fully got into it, is how to kind of discern between like a true desire for polyamory versus a kind of distorted desire that comes from maybe a fear of intimacy or a fear of commitment that, can often come with monogamy.
Really good question. I think everybody who is thinking about this path should ask themselves that. And if they're not sure, go see a therapist who can help them with that, to unpack it. It's something I need to ask myself. And I keep asking myself once in a while, just to check in and just to know that I'm doing it for the right reasons, because I think it would be unfair to my partners if I was in polyamory just to avoid commitment, for example, because I want to be committed to my partners, and they deserve that. Commitment looks different in polyamory, but it's still there. So if somebody's choosing to avoid commitment by saying they're polyamorous, that doesn't really work, because if anything, you need to be committed to each person without safety wheels, without rails, because again, there's nothing to fall back on, like the institution of marriage or legal recognition. You just basically have to be there and keep showing up consistently in your relationship with your partner, and doing it with more than one person is more challenging, for sure. So it's not for everybody in that sense. So again, if you're doing it and you're not sure, then see what actually happens when you're called to show up and be committed to more than one person. And if you know that you don't want attachment and don't want to be committed, fine, then be clear about being ethically non-monogamous, dating around, doing casual things. Just be honest about it. And whoever wants the same thing can do that. And maybe at some point that will not feel enough anymore, and you'll be longing for more intimacy and commitment. I think that if somebody is avoiding certain things, it will show up in polyamory or in monogamy. It will still show up. It might take a little bit longer, but it'll still show up. So I think these hard questions around what do I really want, and I suppose, do I feel whole, right? Or is something missing? Most people, when I surveyed people on like how do they know or what changed when they started practicing polyamory, so the majority of people really talked about how all of a sudden they felt more themselves, but they're more authentically themselves. They felt free. They felt this just this undeniable sense of this is where I'm supposed to be, and something just clicked for them. And for those that don't, they often then go back to monogamy if that feels better. Now, it's possible that the fear of doing it comes from a trauma. So sometimes you may want rationally, you believe, yeah, makes sense. Why would you want to be with one person all your life? It makes total sense to just be ethically seeing multiple people and everybody's okay with it. But I can't do it because I feel so insecure and I just like my nervous system just won't let me do it. Okay. It might be that with therapy or group work or some other path, maybe being single for a while, just working on yourself, you can get there. It may be that the trauma is quite deep, and even with lifelong therapy, it'll be hard to heal fully. And being in a monogamous relationship that's relatively relaxed and open, and maybe allows you to have intimate friends and friends that you cuddle with, etc. It doesn't have to be full polyamory, but it can be somewhere on the spectrum that still feels quite free and enabling and supportive.
Beautiful, yeah. I love that. I think it's even a question as someone in a monogamous relationship should ask themselves, like, am I in the monogamous relationship because it creates a safety for me that allows me to avoid certain things about myself that I might feel uncomfortable. It's interesting that the question I was asked was framed in that direction. We don't frame it like, oh, I'm in this relationship just because it creates safety and ease and I don't have to worry about my insecurities, which I think is a really valid way to look at ourselves continuously, even in monogamous relationships.
Well, that's the thing. Most people enter monogamy from, when they're teenagers, and they never ask the question, why am I doing this? Right? But when somebody chooses polyamory, everybody's going to ask them why. Because it's just like not normal. I think the real question, the question is, why am I choosing any kind of dynamic? Asking the question, why is monogamy right for me, can bring some really interesting answers back. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Roy. Thank you for such a beautiful conversation once again. I want to also remind listeners, in our previous conversation, we really talked a lot about what monogamous people can take from polyamorous people and how they do relationships, and some of the things we touched on, like agreements and communication and stuff. So if that's something you're really interested in, you can find that episode by just searching Roy and my podcast. But again, I want to say thank you to Roy for such an open conversation, for so much wisdom, for giving us so many different ways to look at our monogamous relationships, but also our desire or our polyamorous relationships as well. And I'm sure the listeners are wondering where they can find you, where they can come to your workshops and your sharing circles.
Well, they can find everything on openrelating.love and subscribe to my newsletter if they want to get it by email, or go to Instagram at openrelating, or Threads. I'm also on Threads.
Wonderful. So listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody. You might even want to share it with your partner. You might want to sit down and listen to this episode with your partner, because maybe you've got some ideas about how you can improve your relationship. You might even want to open your relationship, but maybe it's a conversation to have before you listen to the podcast together than just springing in the podcast on them. But there may be someone in your life you want to share this with, right? Who is considering opening up the relationship or considering entering into polyamory. So please do share it with them, share the love with those people. And I finish off by just saying thank you for listening. And I say ciao, ciao.